are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 15 of History's Greatest Idiots, the show in which we go back through the ages and all of human history and bring you cock-ups and screw-ups and mess-ups, the likes of which you will never see again, and hopefully you will learn lessons from and never repeat those mistakes again. But who are we kidding? We're humans. We like messing up like I just did there. Great start. Joining me as ever is my amazing co-host, Derek. Derek, are you okay?
I'm good. It's awesome here. I don't know if I like being in the middle.
Well,
I feel like you
get the most heat. Yeah. And joining us for a very special show, I just want to thank her for being here. Laurel from Hightailing Through History. Thank you so much for joining us. It's such a pleasure having you here. We've been connected on social media for so long. We love your show so much. So thank you for joining us.
And your reels. So entertaining.
Oh my God, your social media presence is amazing.
Thank you. Wow.
You put out so much work.
This is wonderful. Thank you. Honestly, thank you so much. This has been, well, one, I'm thrilled to be here. And two, I'm a big fan of your show as well, too. And when you guys asked me to be here, I'm like, yeah, I will be here in what looks a little bit like a bunker.
We should explain to the audience who are watching. Yes, that's right. we should explain to the audience who are watching this either live or after the fact that you are in rural Wisconsin. So there may be like a slight drop in internet quality, but so far it's been really great. So
good. I'm sitting as close as I can to where I figure the router might be. So we're
smart.
See how that goes.
So for the benefit of our audience who may not have heard about your show, can you tell us a little bit about what you guys do and what you cover and what you're into over there?
Yeah. So the show Hightailing Through History, I co-host with my sister Katie, and every couple of weeks we get together. As we say, we get high in our own way. I say I'm the resident stoner, cannabis enthusiast, if you will. And my sister's a little more of the boozer, likes to have a glass of wine or a whiskey as we go. So it could be high in your own way. You could be high on green tea or life. It doesn't matter. But like your show, we surprise each other with weird, wonderful, different sort of history, something that's maybe a little bit less known, or just kind of the fun stuff to chat about in our smoke circle, as we like to call it, our gatherings.
That's really great. It's funny because when we started this podcast and when I kind of got together with Derek, like the general idea behind the podcast was just like we both enjoyed history, right? We enjoyed it from a certain perspective where people take it so seriously, like every single topic in history. And obviously some topics need to be taken seriously because you have to get the facts right. But at the same time, there should be a level of enjoyment about learning the past and maybe kind of enriching your life with that. And I think you guys do such an excellent job of that with your show. I really, really enjoy it. And again, for anyone who isn't following you, where can they find your podcast? And also, what's your social media? Because we should say that you have some of the best social media content I've ever seen.
That's quite a compliment, because I was somebody who really had a hard time with social media, with posting. But when you find something that you really love doing, in this case, making history fun, you enjoy the process a lot more. And so now I really love doing the social media part, which is on Instagram, we're Hightailing History, all together. And that's really our main hub.
Yeah.
Is Instagram. That's kind of where most of our community is. It's how I know you guys and a bunch of other wonderful history folks. And then we're also on TikTok as Hightailing History, and Twitter, which I'm not great on Twitter, but we're there too. You can find us on the Facebook. In terms of where the podcast is, it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Samsung, wherever you get your favorite podcasts.
Excellent. That's really wonderful. And it's really great to share our platform as well, because we've got a lot of interesting people to talk about. I feel like we talk about kind of similar subject matters, like particularly people from history. Myself and Derek like to cover, obviously, idiots. You guys like to cover really interesting, varied topics. So as I understand it, Derek, you and Laurel have kind of collabed a little bit on this. Would that be fair to say?
I thought of an idea after listening to the episode on the Lavender Scare. I was like, "Ooh, an idiot!" And then I just thought it would be fun to not do anything except for kind of hang out and BS and have a guest presenter, like a guest presenter exchange program.
Yes, that's great. We can go to their country and eat all the wine and cheese. Sorry. So Laurel, we're about 6 minutes in. We tend to try and keep it reasonably short at the start. Can you tell us who your idiot is this week? And for those watching at home or afterwards, we'll have a bunch of wonderful slides and images to go along with this episode, thanks to Derek. So yeah, Laurel, please take it away.
All right. So, gentlemen, listeners, my idiot for you today is someone that most high school students learn about. However brief or in-depth the study of this person was for them, he comes up on high school students' radar. And he came up on mine all these years later while I was researching a story for my podcast, as Derek mentioned, about the Lavender Scare. And, oh man, he messed up. We have got an idiot.
Oh, yeah.
We've got an idiot here. Here we go. So Joseph McCarthy, he was born on November 14th, 1908, near Appleton, Wisconsin, which is just apropos that I am here in the state of Wisconsin, my northern neighbor, as I like to say. And he was born in a little town called Grand Chute. And the thing
Sounds
is,
very rodeo.
it is, yeah. Grand Chute. Sounds like it's
boy.
like in, Montana or something.
Yeah.
Kind of rodeo-esque like that. But his early days bio, in comparison to some of the idiots that you guys cover on your show, so we're kind of off picture here. He doesn't really have a very interesting bio for early days.
Right.
There's not really much going on. He's a smart kid, academically speaking, at least. I can't really speak much to his common sense or other activities in his life.
He was really gullible. His mates are like, "Look, I pulled my finger off," and he's like, "Oh my god, what did you do?"
Yeah, the uncle that would grab his nose, that whole thing. He was like, "Oh, it's gone." No, but he was academically a smart kid,
Right.
and he went on to Marquette University in Milwaukee. And while he was there, he was elected the president of his law school class. Was well liked enough. He earns his law degree in 1935, and he works his absolute ass off trying to be a circuit judge for Wisconsin's 10th Judicial Circuit.
Okay, so he wants that judiciary appointment like out the gate. Right?
Oh yeah, right in there. He doesn't want to be anybody's assistant. He doesn't want to be a lawyer. He's going right for judge. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. That sort of thing. But it pays off for him.
Oh.
And he becomes the state's youngest circuit judge at the age of 30.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is really young for a judge. Some of these fuckers don't get on until they're in their 60s. That's crazy.
Yes.
Oh my God.
It's like got a rocket under him.
Yeah. He pestered enough people long enough that, like, just give him what he wants. Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Probably.
Politicking.
Yeah.
Based on how the rest of his life goes, maybe. So here he is, 30 years old, doing the circuit judge thing. And like I said, his early life, there's not really much to be said about him because it's really generally uneventful. Years later, it's 1942, and McCarthy takes a leave of absence from his judgery and answers the call of his Uncle Sam. Because World War II is now fully in swing, and America has somewhat recently joined the fight as of the end of 1941.
Mm-hmm.
And McCarthy enters the war as a first lieutenant in the Marine Corps. And he's assigned, he's like a intelligence officer of sorts with a dive bomber squadron. It's a very cool sounding job, but all the descriptions of it essentially just describe it as it's pretty safe. He's just relaying information to, from the higher ups to the squadron.
Sure.
And he got to go out a few times and, be a observer and ride in the back, basically.
You got plane ride?
Got to ride along. That's so cute.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Take your idiot child friend to work day thing with Joseph McCarthy. That's amazing.
And there are some stories that I guess they're basically like, look, buddy, if you just want to sit in the back, it's like kind of, yeah, like a ride along. If they gave him like a little like plastic badge and we're like, here's your little, here's your pair of toy handcuffs. You can arrest all the, all the things you want. It's kind of like that for him. He's right in the back. And I guess he was given permission to just shoot off as much ammunition as he wanted. And so he basically was just kind of like shooting at coconut trees and this and that.
Wow.
But they ended up calling him Tail Gunner Joe, which wasn't, it doesn't sound like a mean nickname necessarily, but it was in mockery of him. And so.
I always feel like I don't know when people are doing that to me either. Like,
yeah, I think I may have had a nickname like that for a very long time in my youth, but it's fine. Those people are all arseholes. So yeah, but like, yeah, I think it's like Joseph McCarthy, just like, yeah, go nuts, kid. Yeah, just waste all that ammunition. Don't worry that there are like Russians, like one gun between two of them on the eastern front. Just like do what you want. Oh, look at him with his little medals.
Yeah, there he is.
Oh, sorry, we have someone joining us in the chat. Toasterzoid, your great granddad was a tail gunner in World War II. Amazing.
Awesome.
I bet he was more effective than Joe McCarthy.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, because see what that wasn't. Yeah, I should clarify. That wasn't like his actual job. They basically were like, "Go on, get him back, kid." Not kid, sir. Being an actual tail gunner is a completely different thing. But his situation was more of like a ride along, as I understand it, as it gets talked about. I should say.
Sure.
I wasn't there, but yeah. So that was his military career, and while he's still on active duty, he starts running as a Republican nominee for the Senate.
Oh,
that was probably pretty helpful for him.
Yeah.
Especially, I mean, he could very easily say, "Hey, look, I'm a veteran. Well,
War hero.
I'm a war hero. I've done these missions. I've done these things. This is my position." And I'm sure it looked very good for him.
Killed multiple coconuts.
All those coconut trees. With the
it's like, don't vote for him. He killed my father. No, sorry.
And he, but there's just also that reflection again of how hard he went to be a circuit judge and jumping right into that deep end there.
Yeah.
Actually, you know what? I should say that's going to be the theme for this story is jumping into the deep end.
Right.
Really. Now that I'm saying it out loud, I'm like, yeah, that's McCarthy. And
that feels accurate.
He goes right in. He's trying to run for Senate. And he doesn't win the first time around, but 1946, now the war is over, and he wins in an upset against Senator Robert M. La Follette Jr. And then Joe becomes the youngest member of the Senate.
And this was out of Wisconsin still?
Out of Wisconsin, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So this young Wisconsin senator, he's quiet. He keeps his head down. He works on housing legislation, sugar rationing. He's not making waves.
Right.
Status quo. He tends towards conservationism. No, not conservationism. Conservatism. Sorry.
Sure.
In his votes.
Yeah. Very different things.
Very different. Very, very different.
Spelled really close, though. Damn it.
Yeah.
Which now I had to like double check. Like, did I actually write the wrong thing? No, I didn't. I just said it wrong.
Yeah.
Conservatism. There we go. And his votes and his opinions, but he still is flying under the proverbial radar for 4 years.
So he's kind of stealing a living to a certain extent. Like he's not making massive waves, not really shooting for the stars, just doing his job, biding his time.
If only he had stayed that way.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, you're reading this first part of it. You're like, he's not much of an idiot. He sounds fine. Doesn't sound like too much of a big deal. However, everyone's waiting for that idiot moment. And, and so just for the moment, I'm just going to leave him here in his first term, playing nice. We're going to pull the lens back and kind of look at the big picture here. Something that I like to do in my stories is set the scene, get the climate of the time, the vibes, as if you will. Back in September 1945, end of World War II, into early 1950, America's in its first 5 years out of World War II, which ends very strangely for those involved on the side of the Allied forces. For some context and why I say that, the Soviet Union became an ally during the war. It was one of those, the enemy of my enemy is my friend sort of thing.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And once that mutual enemy is taken care of, there's this scramble for dominance.
Mm-hmm.
And the picture I always get in my head whenever I think of this scenario is it's like all the Allied forces, including the Soviet Union, they're all patting each other on the back. Well done, boys. We did it. Good job. We really showed them,
Yeah.
And then they turn and they look at beautiful, well, I shouldn't say beautiful, but it's like a golden, shining Berlin city. This seat of power here for Nazi Germany. And they all look at it and they're like, okay, here we are, a team. Let's link arms and walk into the city together. This doesn't happen, of course.
No.
They're walking towards the city, and they look over and Stalin is power walking. What to the point where it is practically running. And just as they're figuring out, oh, we have a problem here. Stalin's going to try and take it all for himself, the Soviet Union. And so then there's this all-out scramble for Berlin, which we know gets divided in half, east and west, for decades to come. So just a little context there. And so from that moment on, it was a series of microaggressions, macro, maybe depending on what it was and what side of it you were on, that kicks off the Cold War.
Of course.
Again, decades long.
45 years essentially of back and forth, tit for tat, micro wars, proxy wars. Yeah.
Yes.
It brought us something good though. I don't remember what. I don't know. I think the space program. Yes.
Space program. Beatles song back in the USSR. That's pretty good.
Yes, that was a good one.
Yakov Smirnov. That was pretty good for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'd imagine, because obviously all three of us will maybe, I don't want to speak for Laurel, but I know that myself and Derek, being Zennials, will be old enough to remember the fall of the Berlin Wall when we were kids. And like we talked about this before, it's one of those moments where you're watching history even though you're a kid. You're like, everyone is watching this.
I remember I think uncle, cousin, whatever you want to call it, I think bought mail order a piece of the Berlin Wall when it came down. They're selling that in Minnesota.
Yeah. There's a very famous picture of the Berlin Wall, like someone with a pickaxe putting it into the Berlin Wall, and graffitied on the wall is Wolves Poly Forever, which is Wolverhampton Polytechnic College, which is the city I live in at the moment. And that is now Wolverhampton University. So that's a random, along with David Hasselhoff going, I'm going to free the world. But also, I think it's the reason I bring this up is a lot of people who listen to this podcast, and the majority of our audience is slightly older, but some of our younger audience will not really know what it was like to live under the shadow of constant looming war, particularly like I guess before our time in the 60s, but also in the 80s. There's a lot of confrontation going on with Ronald Reagan and the various leaders of the Soviet Union at the time. There was a looming threat of nuclear war to the point where it pervaded popular culture. So we had that in our childhood growing up, like this, maybe at war with the Soviets at any point in time. And for me, a Welsh person is like, my grandfather's a socialist. Like, why would we fight the communists? Like, this doesn't make sense to me. So
they're scary.
Because they're scary and they want to take away our religion. And I'm like, I'm atheist. Okay. So yeah, I think for our younger audience, that context, like, shit was scary. The Cold War for 45 years was pretty tense time in the world.
Well, even in the 80s, you put out movies like Red Dawn, which is in a way cool,
amazing,
still kind of scary when you're thinking about it. Like, oh my God, I might have to fight as a kid and shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the Soviets were always portrayed in all those movies as the most hard-ass, scary, tough people, just like
the Russian from Rocky.
I was just about to say, yes, I know. I will break you. Yeah, that kind of thing, and it's
I must break you.
If he dies, he dies. I must break you. Yes. And there's really a very very set picture of what Americans are getting, of what the Soviet Union is, of what Soviets are, of what communism is. It's this scary, cold, hard. It's a harsh land, It's they're atheist and freedom hating. And it creates a lot of fear. And the internet didn't exist, so it wasn't like you can kind of compare, stories and hear real things from people. It was just what you were told, by your government or your media.
You get what you get, and you don't throw a fit.
Yeah.
For news.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and pre-Cold War, we as in America, I should say, we already had this fear from 1917, when there was the Russian Revolution, or the Bolshevik Revolution, when the Russian Tsar was overthrown, putting it as quickly as I can, and the country became communist. And that was a really scary thing. And that became actually the first Red Scare, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the idea as it is, just full stop, the idea of communism can spread quickly. It's like, it's thought, I could say something that could influence Derek and Lev, and then, we're saying this out to your listeners, and that could influence them. And that was the thought. It was like cancerous, or, like a mold that has to be cut out.
The domino effect, essentially, is a phrase that was used a lot, particularly for governments around the world. Like, well, if one goes communist, then the next one will go, and then the next one, and the next one's like, you're kind of ruling out free will here, but sure, okay.
Well, I feel like if it takes off that well, there might be something to it.
Yes. Also, like, I think they saw communism as like, we now see boy bands. Like, it really was never going to be that successful. Like, oh my God, Stalin.
Yeah.
Russia.
Well, luckily, yeah. I mean, it's weird though, because communism was almost taking over in Germany at the same time, and kind of led to the uprise of socialism. And then socialists and communists hated each other, and I don't understand how that works.
Me neither. Yeah, that's always a question I have when I go through research of this time. It's like, why are you two fighting, or why are you not? These sort of things where it's like, it doesn't really quite make sense, but But yeah, I mean, you stated exactly right. And that's actually what I have here is like, that domino effect of border sharing countries falling to communism. And it wasn't like that thought is completely unfounded necessarily, because through the late 40s, the world is seeing what's happening with those, the Eastern Bloc countries being pulled in by the Soviet Union, or becoming the Soviet Union. And then we have communism spreading into China, 1949. And now we have the Korean Peninsula, that the northern part of the Korean Peninsula was occupied by Soviet troops at the end of World War II, or, towards the end and after the fall of World War II. And so there's communist influence there. And they're like, well, we've got to stop this. And therefore we have the Korean War, which begins June 27th, 1950, continues for 3 years after that. And the fear for Americans, as they're watching the spread of communism during this last half of the 40s, was the thought that our country, as in America, we are now going to be the target of the Soviet Union, trying to subvert our American freedom-loving way of life, capitalism. They're gonna completely change everything that we've been built on and that we know. That's the fear, I should say. And adding to this general fear amongst most of the American public was the addition that communists, they look just like you and me. You can't look at them and go, oh, I know that's a communist. And that was scary because they could be living amongst us, working amongst us. They could be our teachers, they could be teaching our kids things.
Oh, no.
And yeah,
if only there was somebody to point them out.
Oh, who could that person be? and so also along with this, speaking now, shifting over to our American government, in Congress, there was legislation moving through called the Nixon bill. And it's that same tricky Dick Nixon, and the McCarran Act. And in the Mont-Nixon bill, which passed overwhelmingly in the House, it was a law that required people to register that they were members of the Communist Party in the United States. That's right. And then the McCarran Act takes it a step further and then allows for, air quotes here, emergency detainment of subversive communists.
Yeah. Well, that's not fucking scary.
Freedom.
Yeah. And that was, of course, the much more controversial part of, that addition, but people were still for it. Well, people that were anti-communist were still very much for it. And really, because of how overwhelmingly it passed, both these things passed through the House, it's thought that this was the reflection of the overwhelming American public opinion. Is the thought that this is what everybody thinks. And we think this is, and because we think it's that important, we are also representatives, of the nation. And therefore, we all think this.
You're shaping the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
It's like marketing.
Yeah.
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 There you go.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm playing with graphics now.
Yeah. And you're not wrong with this. And it happens. So here we go. It's January 1950. A State Department employee by the name of Alger Hiss. He's convicted under perjury charges, but it's for him being a thought to be a communist spy working inside the government.
Right.
Holy shit. They've infiltrated, right? They're on the inside, man. They know they're in there. They've rooted down deep. And so the story of Alger Hiss, it's a bit of a muddled story, but it can be potentially pretty tragic. Or, kind of a sad one, I should say, depending on what one believes is true, I should say. The brief synopsis: Alger Hiss, who did work in the State Department, was named by Whittaker Chambers, who is a journalist, communist, he was a Soviet spy. And he said that Hiss is also part of his espionage ring.
Right.
Huh.
And Hiss always denied it. He went through 2 trials where the espionage charges were past the statute of limitations, but the perjury for the espionage was what he was being tried for and was ultimately convicted on in his second trial. Just very briefly, I didn't, because that was a whole rabbit hole in itself. And so I was pulling myself out. I was like, no, don't go down too far, because it gets kind of messy, because there is some evidence where people were saying, nope, this was his code name, and this was this, and this was that, and this is what he said or did. And then later there's, some actual Soviet spies or people working in Soviet intelligence that were like, we don't really have paperwork on this guy. Wow. And then they could very well be saying, oh, we don't, but then hiding the files.
Yeah.
Or not, and so there just seems to be a lot of confusion around it. But he was convicted and had prison time for, I think it was 3 years, 8 months.
Okay.
But
it's quite a lot for perjury.
Perjury, really. Yeah.
It feels like a long time.
That's like when OJ got convicted for theft, but it was really murder.
Yeah, that's right. And he got a life sentence or something for that?
Oh, it was long. It's 15 years or something.
Yeah, he was in for
Sorry,
a while.
I wandered off.
No. It's a similar thing.
No.
I thought perjury would have been we have a similar thing in this country called perverting the course of justice, which is really it's the British way of saying it. It's just ridiculous. But the most you can get for that, I know it's so stupid. The most you can get for that is 6 months in prison, and the majority of the time, 90% of cases, it'll be a suspended sentence, so you won't go to prison really. So 3 years and 8 months is a long time.
Yeah.
Absolutely, for lying under oath. I mean, it's kind of important though, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like that death penalty for jaywalking.
Yeah.
That's just right. Yeah, and I think this is just purely my speculation along with it. It's just the thought of like, well, we can't get him from espionage, but we can get him for perjury. And if we can really stick it to him and kind of make somewhat of an example out of him, we'll do it. And and that worked, I guess, because really that trial was huge. Everyone's like, oh my gosh, we've got somebody in the State Department that's a spy. This is insane.
Yeah.
Shake you a little bit.
Right. I mean, and so because of its high profile nature, it's thought that encouraged the passing of the Mont-Nixon bill and the McCarthy Act. And when they went back to the Senate the second time around, those things passed through because they're like, well, we need to know who these communists are, and we need to be able to take legal action on them if we need to.
Yeah. I just, on a quick side note as well, they're very focused on this guy who was convicted of perjury in very much an Al Capone sort of way. Like, well, we can't get him on racketeering, we'll get him on taxes sort of thing. But like, what I guess the American government didn't mention is that they had cherry-picked the best of the Nazi scientific forces with Operation Paperclip. And, as they say in an episode of Archer, you walk into NASA and say Zeke Howell, half of them will stand to attention. Because,
I love that show.
They're former Nazis.
Yeah.
I love that show. So, America was very and a lot of the people that they brought into their ranks, and I think we've covered one recently, Derek, were like former mass murderers. So
that was the Talaman guy.
Yeah, the guy who started the drug that killed and physically damaged like hundreds of thousands of people for decades. He was fine. No trial for him. But yet this one spy gets done for perjury for 3.5 years, and all of a sudden everyone needs to be vetted. It seems a bit disproportionate given what else is going on, to be honest. But anyway, that's just me venting. Please continue.
No, I mean, you're exactly right. So we're gonna be in 1950 now. Here we are. Can I swear? I'm only going to
swear all you like.
Okay, thank you. I'll keep it sort of clean. I'm a bit of a potty mouth, but shit seems to be hitting the fan here, and so we're going to bring Joseph McCarthy back in again now that we kind of understand the soup of that everything is getting stirred into. And he's still in his first term as a junior senator from Wisconsin. He's flying under the radar, but he's looking at hopefully getting reelected soon. Communism and the Soviet Union was the other, air quotes there, that we could rally against.
Right.
It didn't matter if you were Republican or Democrat or, whatever. For the most part, generally the majority of the American public, this was something that people could rally behind and be like, you know what? It's us against them. It's capitalism against communism. It made a really good dividing line in the sand. And, subversion of the American way of life, it's a bipartisan thing, so something everyone can get behind. And so the next month, February 1950, Senator McCarthy, he's in Wheeling, West Virginia, which why he's there, I'm not entirely sure why he's not speaking in Wisconsin, but he's in West Virginia.
Booze.
Booze.
Got really good booze.
It's probably what it is. He's speaking at a Republican women's group. And this is the moment that he decides, for whatever reason, he's going to have a piece of paper with him. And he's got this folded piece of paper and he starts waving it around. He's like, I've got 205 names of known communists that are working and shaping policy in the State Department. And the quiet, under the radar senator from Wisconsin, Joseph McCarthy, has suddenly, found some voice here. And he's loud and he's commanding, and he's very good with how he's very good with his rhetoric. He's very good with how he's using his words to create fear and surprise and shock. And with this group of women, they're like, oh my gosh, this man's telling us there are people in the State Department that are actually shaping our laws and have influence in our government. Are you kidding me? People freaked out. Card-carrying communists in the State Department.
Right.
Boom. Yeah.
Changing everything. They're going to change our way of life.
Yes.
Yeah. Even though they're card carrying because we've made them register, apparently.
Oh,
right? It's all right. No, never mind that. Never mind that.
Yeah,
it's fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And from that point on, McCarthy leads this crusade, if you will, against communism. And to his supporters, he looked like a true patriot.
Oh, yeah.
He sets himself up as the one man, the white knight, to stand up to communism, which was poisoning the world. And it made everybody else, because he's willing to stand up and be very loud about this, it made everybody else around him in Congress look soft, look weak on communism and just subversive activities. And it really puts him out in front as like, he's our man that's going to really get to the bottom of this. He's not scared to say what's on his mind about these things. He will tell it like it is.
Hey,
and
a lot of assholes that sound the same way.
Basically describing every politician that's been voted in recently. Shit. You've hit onto something here.
Yeah. So he's going to stand up. He's going to fight. Ooh, there we go. He's going to stand up and fight tooth and nail for freedom, keeping America and great and capitalist. And sorry, I digress there. But this period of time after February 1950, when he waived his supposed names, it begins what we know in the history books as the Red Scare. Although technically this is the sequel. We Red Scare 2, The Rise of McCarthyism. You know, this is our movie sequel here for Red Dawn.
Oh yeah.
And the second Red Scare is 4 years of time. It had been gathering steam up to this point, but the real fever pitch with McCarthyism is this 4 years, 1950 to 1954. And so now we're getting to the idiot part. So I do want to point out, yes, we have had some cases of spies and subversive activity in the government.
Yeah. And we had, sorry to interrupt as well. We had that over in the UK. We had the Cambridge spy ring, which was particularly famous in history. If you guys haven't heard of that, I would highly recommend you look up on that. But they were communist spies that came through the Cambridge educational system and made their way into, I think, the Secret Service. So,
goodness.
Right. At that same period of time, you said?
Oh, yeah. Around about this time. Yeah, big deal.
Yeah. And as with a lot of stories, this is the case with this one, too. There's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of cogs in the machine. We've got Hoover at the FBI stirring things up. We've got things coming out of the CIA that are stirring things up. We have a switch in presidencies 3/4 of the way through this Red Scare, which, some people then argue that it could have shut McCarthy down a little bit faster, but he was able to go unchecked a little longer than maybe he should, or, there's things that go back and forth with that, of course. And on top of that, it's not like they didn't find Soviet spies. We had Alger Hiss, who was convicted for his, perjury. Yeah. And then we had in 1953, Julius and Ethel Rosenbaum convicted and executed for sharing atomic secrets with the Soviet Union for making the atomic bomb. In Canada, around this time, there's another conviction for espionage. Then you talked about Cambridge. So there are things going on. I do want to make that clear that it's not completely unfounded.
No.
However, he fabricates his part to a degree. And so now idiot stuff. Okay, here we go. 205 names on a piece of paper. Known freaking communists in the government. Then the number turns to 57. Then later it's 81. Who's counting? Who's counting this?
Whatever. Numbers change. Deal with it.
It's spreading.
Yeah. And then receding and then spreading a little.
Yeah. We're just figuring this out as we go.
Yeah.
And McCarthy's having these congressional subcommittees to investigate these claims. And they are bipartisan. He is a Republican senator, but he's got Democrats on there with him as well, too. And he is subpoenaing the hell out of everybody. Yeah, it's like candy at a parade. He is flinging them out here, there, and everywhere. Although, unlike candy at a parade, nobody really wants to go for it. You don't get that mad rush out into the street, like, that's the rules. It's like, oh, I've been subpoenaed. And he goes through the State Department, the Defense Department, military intelligence, and the Civil Service Commission, which is the agency that oversees all the civilian employees of the U.S. federal government.
Wow.
Then
so
Hollywood.
many people.
It
I was going to say,
was.
and major entertainers as well. Charlie
Mhm.
Chaplin, I think, was one of the victims. I mean, that was more
Yeah.
Hoover than anything, but yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, Arthur Miller's a really good example of
Yes.
that as well too. That was someone I did a reel on when he was called in to testify, and with him it was like, their big thing was like, well, give us a name. You tell us all your other writer friends who are also communists. You give us a name, and we'll let this go. And they did that with him, and they did that with so many other people. And people were just like, here's some names, but but Arthur Miller was essentially like, no, go fuck yourself. He didn't say that, of course, but that was kind of his, in a very polite and nice way. He was basically like, no, I'm not giving you names. No, I'm not a communist. Leave me alone. And he writes The Crucible about the Red Scare, which is set during the Salem witch trial, which is some symbolism for you. But, with that, with Hollywood, there's a lot of anti-communism propaganda just so they weren't targeted, or, just like, be like, hey, I'm putting out this film that talks about how scary it is to be married to a communist. So don't look at me.
Yeah. And also some actors who were quite actively involved in somewhat rooting that out. I know Ronald Reagan had like a big part in like the whole, he's a communist and they're a communist. And,
Yeah.
that
If
was
we
his
can
thing.
deflect away from ourselves and point out other people, we're going to look like a really cool person, and we're going to look like a hero. And then we also don't have the spotlight on us in that.
And if we
way.
point at the right ones, then we get more roles because we can go against competitors if we wanted to.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that is, that would be one of those things where they're like, just give us a name. And you'd be like, well, Gary Cooper's up against me for this role. Gary Cooper, get that guy in there, drag him in. So yeah, it was everywhere, really.
Toastoid, very, very good point here. Those old cheesy alien invasion movies were propaganda against immigrants and communists. I know that the invasion of the body snatchers is a particularly big one around about this time. The idea of, but they look like us, and they're not us. They're from a different existence and stuff. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of that going on there. And yes, it was a good way of deflecting, as you said, Laurel, attention away from them.
Yeah. So despite all of that, all those testimonies, all the name calling, and honestly, I try to kind of remove my opinion about things sometimes just so I can kind of tell it as straightforward as it is. But I will say he was just doing some plain old fashioned shitty, mean name calling.
Yeah.
He was just harassing and yelling and just looking like a big old bully, really, which it can be effective, I suppose, in the sense of like you looking more powerful to somebody, I guess, but if you're not getting anything out of it, if you're not
making any money,
you're not, there's no result, that becomes a problem. And so anyway, he never found a communist, basically, at the end of the day there with that. And not a single one. No. He called hundreds of people in. Not a single one.
So close.
He would do that stuff like, I know you're a communist, so give us the name. And so when he would get these other names, for people that maybe were willing to give up names, whatever they might be, but it did spur forth like, okay, well, I'm giving you a name, so now I have this next lead to follow. And
it's like an MLM, like a pyramid scheme, basically. It's like one person starts and they give you the names of 5 other people, and then those 5 people give you 5 other names. And it's like, I can't believe, because I didn't know the results. I just know the furore around it in history. I didn't know he didn't catch a single communist. What kind of and this went on for years.
Yes.
Right. Wow.
Yep.
See, one benefit is that, you guys were talking about, we did actually have spies, but like the people that were supposed to go find them and get them, found them and caught them and did stuff. And the one that was out there doing the marketing didn't find any.
No, not a single one.
Especially nothing that was like substantial that you could even prosecute on.
Yeah.
Like if, let's say, Joe Schmo over here, I just realized I said the name of my person I'm covering, so I must add a Schmo to that. And but let's say he is communist. Let's say he carries the card or whatever, and he's a very proud communist. And I talk to him or whatever, they could say, well, Laurel, you talk to him. You must agree with him or whatever, that kind of stuff. It's like, I'm like, well, I talked to him, but I'm not giving him any money. I'm not joining his club or whatever. And so it would be stuff like that, that they would try and go after, and there was nothing. And so he's reelected in 1952 because his popularity is growing despite not having anything to show for it. His popularity grows. He's reelected in 1952. He keeps right on going with his witch hunt, and people were scared. And this is why I think he's an idiot or a good candidate for your show. He's pointing fingers. He's naming names. He's dragging people into court, accusing them without evidence, or again, at least anything that's substantial or has any sort of value. And he's ruining lives doing it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Relationships, marriages, jobs. This is a time in America where being communist means you're an enemy of the country.
Yeah. And communist is so ill-defined as well. Like anyone who isn't like radically in favor of everything American, immediately you're a communist. If you're an artist, you're probably a communist. If you're a writer, you're probably a communist. Like you're doing away with vast swathes of the cultural identity of a country just because you're like, I'm terrified of these people. It's like like you pointed out, it was literally everyone. And the end kind of came, it all fell apart like very, very quickly towards the end. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. And so well, I'll tell you in just a second here. He really will step in it in a second, but yeah, it's that sort of, and I explained this to Katie when we did our episode, the Lavender Scare, which kind of talks about the other side of this, which I'll mention in a moment. But I said, Katie, anything un-American was basically if you didn't look like the white Leave It to Beaver family.
Yeah.
If you were gay, if you were of color, if you were, if you had, well, again, socialist, if you had any sort of an artist, if you had any sort of other ideas other than, a very strong 110% capitalism, and so, what do you do when you're really kind of caught between that rock and a hard place? And so I think that's also what makes him very unlikable for me, is because something that's going on concurrently with this is that Lavender Scare, and it's far less known in comparison to the Red Scare. And like I said, I talked about it on a recent episode, and it was targeted those who were gay or lesbian in the government. And McCarthy then takes this route of, well, since it's illegal to be homosexual, if Soviet spies get evidence of a government worker who's gay or lesbian, that person could be coerced, blackmailed, can give up government secrets if they have security clearance, and therefore they need to go too. And yes, Derek, you have that up saying like perverts. That was actually something we talk about, is like that sexual perversion, sexual deviance, and it's homophobia, really.
Basically, yeah.
I don't get
it's
that.
an excuse for homophobia. Yeah. Like I've been like someone sitting there waiting. I've been waiting for this opportunity for so long to hate you, and now I've got it. So yeah, that's what it is.
Because I mentioned to Katie as well too. I said, well, all right, so if you're going to say, someone's gay and has security clearance, and they, someone photographs them with their partner, and they're like, oh, they're not just roommates. They're not just really good friends. They're, and we can blackmail this guy. I'm like, well, wait a second. What about the guy who's having an affair with his secretary, or falls into the Soviet honey trap? Can he not?
We don't care about that. He's plowing Russian women. We don't mind that at all.
Right. And it's like, where's that line there? Anyway, and so the Lavender Scare, I now would argue, having kind of researched both sides of this, I think that's really what kept the Red Scare going. because no communists were found. But you know who they did find?
Yeah.
Gay and lesbians, people, well, I should say just queer individuals, across the board. If there was anything, again, that was un-American or was different about you, lots of air quotes here, but, and if they were to find, anybody that they can go, oh, okay, well, we can oust you. And if we keep finding people, it's just like when they got the names, if they kept getting names or they kept finding people that they could say, oh, well, you're a security risk. It just gave them reason to keep going. And so hundreds and hundreds of gay government workers were fired. Lives were ruined.
Yeah.
Lives were taken. Some people committed suicide after they were outed in such a horrible, humiliating, very public way. And that's what's really terrible to me. And so that's why, again, I don't personally, just to interject my opinion, that's why I have a hard time with Joseph McCarthy. And the hundreds of lives that were affected by this man and those around him who spurred him on. Roy Cohn.
Yes.
Who he himself was gay. And, it's like, it's maddening, but and that's what makes me mad. It's like, and why I think this guy sucks, because for what? There is no evidence. It's truly just witch hunt stuff.
It's
just
to create fear and snake power. And, if people are scared and you're the one that knows how to fix it, sure, easy to stay making a paycheck.
Also, like, the weird thing is, it was an open secret in the government and pretty much in all of Washington that J. Edgar Hoover was gay. And yet somehow he avoided any sanction or prosecution or not that I'm saying he deserved it. I mean, Hoover was a prick, but he somehow avoided it because he also had power and he was useful. So therefore, you're about to get savaged by wolves, apparently.
Yeah.
It's the Nixon werewolf.
It's the Nixon werewolf. But yeah, I think that it wasn't just gay people. It was like gay people they could get, basically, who had no power, which was the majority of them at the time because they were living secret lives. But Hoover was untouchable. So they were like, oh, no, we're not going to mess with that because he could ruin our lives as well. So,
yeah.
Crazy.
And so just to wrap things up for us all, Joe McCarthy finally steps in it. 1954, he goes after the U.S. Army. He goes after everybody, but when he gets to the Army, everyone's like, all right, calm down.
Yeah.
You leave our Army alone. So television exists at this time, of course, right? And McCarthy, maybe ego-driven, probably, he thinks this is going to be great. I'm going to televise these hearings against the Army. And people are going to be like, oh man, how cool is this guy for shining a light on how bad everything is? Again, all to this point. Right? Considering his track record, it's not like he's got a lot to show for it. And so he has a 36-day hearing against the Army, and he looks bad. He attacks, he insults, he doesn't give evidence. And then when he himself is questioned, he sidesteps the questions. He won't answer them. He does one of those like, and then I'll just throw it back at you. He's like, well, wait, you never really answered my question, that kind of thing. And it really became clear to the nation because now the world can see, the nation can see this. It's televised. Everyone's watching it. And they're like, oh, this guy's lost his marbles. He is overstepping his authority. His common sense is out the window. He's just looking bananas up there, just yelling at everybody. And it also, there's a famous line from the hearing where special counsel for the Army, Joseph Nye Welsh, just looks at McCarthy and goes, have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you no sense of decency? Because everyone's just so fed up. And after the years of him accusing and not getting anywhere, but still having a certain level of support from the people, everyone's like, ooh, we don't want to touch this anymore. And it all catches up with him. People realize he's just a mean old windbag.
Yeah.
And he gets censured from the Senate. falls from
And that was
power.
the end.
He's disgraced. Yeah. And it's pretty much, like you said, it's a very quick ending. And unfortunately, he has a problem, had a problem with alcohol abuse.
Yeah.
And after his fall from power, that got worse. And he ended up passing away only 3 years later from cirrhosis of the liver, having liver disease. And yeah.
That's what caused it all right there. He was just drunk the entire time. It was one big blackout the entire 50s.
I don't remember what was those years were a blur. I don't remember. Maybe
can you imagine that he would be like such a teddy bear and just be like a really cool person, but he was just blackout drunk, and then that was why he was so mean. You know, I would hate that be the case, but you know, all the people around him, even those that supported him, even Roy Cohn, which I don't know why I'm having such a hard time saying his name, but even
I rub off on people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My inability to say things.
And even he who was like his mentor and or not mentor, but like they're good buds. And even everyone would talk about how like, they're like, yeah, no, he's kind of a jerk. He's mean. He's not nice. He's, you know, he's venomous with his words, and he just really, but he really knows how to stir the pot. He really knows how to say the right thing to get people to support him. He really knows how to make somebody look bad by pulling on fears and insecurities that a lot of people have, whether it be that individual that he's talking to, or again, the American public, and injecting that into his rhetoric. But yeah, that's Joseph McCarthy, you know, and
almost like he's the inventor of mudslinging in the modern age.
Yeah, I was going to say, if we're talking mudslinging, I really need to introduce you guys to a former Archbishop of Canterbury who was murdered, who was like, he was a working class lad. So whenever he got insulted by people in power, because there was like almost a civil war and he was killed in a cathedral, he would call people whoremongers and stuff. And this is the Archbishop of Canterbury. He's like, you bunch of whoremongers. And it's like, holy shit. This guy's hardcore. So yeah, like McCarthy was very good at like garnering and centralizing fear and then spreading it very easy. He understood the American people's insecurities, and he played on that like a Stradivarius. It was scary how good he was at pulling people's strings, for sure.
That sort of behavior makes me nervous. Pulling on strings and flinging mud and making people like scared and not know what's up.
Yeah, you keep people scared, you can sell them anything. Also, I just wanted to point out, you talk about the downfall of McCarthy. Another interesting figure in this whole story is a news anchor called Edward R. Murrow, who him and his CBS News crew had basically had enough of McCarthy. They were like, oh, fuck it, this guy is dangerous, we need to get rid of him. So they ran a series of news programs about him. The whole sequence of their broadcast is covered in a film written and directed by George Clooney called Good Night and Good Luck. It's a really good film. David Strachan is Edward R. Murrow. There's a bunch of people in it. Robert Downey Jr. is in it. Patricia Clarkson, Jeff Daniels, Frank Langella. Loads of famous actors. It's a great film. It's one of Clooney's better films. He's done some shit, but like it very accurately captures the sense in the country at the time of just how scared people in institutions were of this man. I mean, we're not just talking about, yes, they were working in the TV industry and the news industry. They're journalists, therefore they're probably on the front line of people he doesn't like, but many people working in multiple different industries were scared of having this finger pointed at them, because it was the end of your life. It wasn't necessarily a death sentence, but you were persona non grata from mainstream society forever. So
100%. Yeah. And it was that trickling down, because yes, his targets were government, but that fear is everywhere, right? You know, so you're looking sideways at your neighbor, you're looking sideways at your, you know, your teachers, your coworkers. You're like, are they a communist? Everyone's listening to what you say and really analyzing it in a way of like, ooh, that sounds a little bit commie sympathizer. You know, I don't like that, you know, and it was yeah, it was that sort of ostracizing of, or being ostracized, let's say, from your friends, your family, your community. It was scary for everybody, even if you weren't a direct, target of that. You still were.
That's the thing that sucks too, is it's not even, you don't even have to be against it. You just have to be like, yeah, whatever. And oh, well, you're one of them then.
Yeah,
exactly. It's one of those scary moments in history that we often hope society will learn lessons from, but we're learning very quickly that we do like to repeat patterns as Homo sapiens, don't we? Just love that pattern shit. So we'll just like, oh, that was fun for a while, wasn't it? Let's do that again. So you do get this kind of constant scare. And like you were saying, the portrayal of communists as well, that has been a mainstay of other in Western society ever since. So if there's a group of people you want everyone to be afraid of, you use those things that have existed since even things like the protocols of the elders of Zion. A lot of those were related to some of the Red Scare stuff. So it's all archetypes that have existed for thousands and thousands of years, and yet for some reason the vast majority of people fall for it every time. Really scary shit.
It is. It is. It really is. And history. I've heard this recently from another history podcast host. Her name is Dawn Brody, and she has a podcast called History I'd Like to Fuck. And she's amazing. She said, and I'm trying to just remember this offhand, so it's not going to be as cool as what she does it. But she says, she's annoyed with the phrase, those who don't learn history are doomed to repeat it. It's like, I hate that phrase. It's my pet peeve. And she says, and essentially the reasoning is that she says, history gives us like a playbook, if you will, of how to keep people under the thumb, how to do all these terrible things that we're supposed to learn from and not do. And, she's like, you create fear, you make the people hungry, you scare them, they'll do whatever you want them to do. And that is repeated over and over and over and over and over. Yep. And so, it's just, and when I'm doing these sort of stories like this, I'm like, there it is. There's another one. There's another example. Check. So
it's happening right now in the UK. We're currently going through obviously we had the issue with grain in the Ukraine where it wasn't getting released, and there were, food prices have shot up, and now energy prices in the UK are shooting up to the point where people are calling for a windfall tax on government, on private company profits, because people like Shell and British Gas are making billions of pounds profit, and people are going to have to pay £3,900 worth of fuel bills in a year. So I think we do see that playbook getting brought out so often. It's really scary how often it happens. In terms of scoring Joseph McCarthy, this is a really relatively easy one, because he is one of the. Ultimately, the question you have to ask with McCarthy was, what was his end game? He was never going to make any money off this, right? They were never going to, we're going to employ Joseph McCarthy. You remember the guy who scared everyone? Yeah, he's on our staff now after his political career comes to an end. No one's going to hire this guy as a consultant, right? He's not going to be on $500,000 a year or whatever. And nobody's going to go to an after-dinner speech from a guy who was like, communist. Like, who wants to hear that guy talk? So, like, his only end game I can see is that he whipped up enough furore and like anger and fear and stuff, was maybe for a presidential run potentially, but like, what else could he have done? So ultimately, all of this stuff that he was doing had no end game, and all he did was just ruin lives for essentially no reason other than an overblown sense of patriotism and kind of importance. I should say this though, and I think I may have mentioned this to Derek before. I know someone who worked with Theresa May, who when she was Prime Minister, and she used to come to the West Midlands to do speeches for the Conservative Party when they were in power. And normally you do that in the centre of the West Midlands, which is Birmingham, biggest city. But to get from the train station to where you need to make your speech, it's like there's a whole like networking issue and police and all that, and it would have been very expensive and difficult. Whereas if you come to Wolverhampton and go to the place where my friend works, it's like you can walk down the steps of the train station and you're there, and you're in this huge place that holds thousands and thousands of people and has state-of-the-art television stuff. And anyway, he met Theresa May multiple times. He worked with her. He kind of helped her with the setup and stuff and arranging things, and he'd spoken to her and all this. And I asked him, what's she like? Because you always want to know what the leaders of these people are like. I was like, does she believe that shit? Because she's a Tory, right? Does she believe any of that? He's like, she believes every fucking word she says. Her advisors were all educated in Eton. They are all privately educated, rich children of other conservatives. They have absolutely no idea what the rest of the world is like for other people. She believes it, and she doesn't care what your opinion is. She is on her track, and she is not changing. And that scared me, because at that point, because you have this thing where you're like, maybe they don't believe it, right? Maybe they're just doing it for power or to make money or whatever it is. But actually, some of these scary people, they believe every word they say, even though they're clearly wrong.
Enough. You say it enough, you start believing your own bullshit. And that's usually how I end up with most of my idiots. They believe their own bullshit.
So much. So my score for Joseph McCarthy, and I want an opinion from Derek on this, because we're kind of both jointly scoring. I was going to go 90 with Joseph McCarthy, a nice high 90. Derek, what do you think?
That's where I was at. I was bouncing back between 90 and 91.
Yeah. I think... Yeah.
Inadvertently
justification. Yeah. He didn't kill anyone. Like, I mean, himself directly. But, like, everything else, the kind of creation that he brought into this world, definitely a 90 for sure.
Yep. I'm down with that one.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to play with moving people around.
Center
stage.
Thank you very much. So, Laurel, thank you so much for that. It is really interesting to revisit, because in the UK, obviously, we were outside of... We did have a very small version of that, because whenever you guys have like a big trend or a big movement or a big political thing, we always tend to be like, oh, we'll try that as well, just not quite as good. Like, oh, you've elected an idiot. Yeah, we'll do that too. I mean, slightly younger and less weird looking. Yeah, you know, we're that person that copies you, because it looks good at the time, but by the time we've done it, it's like everyone's moved on.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. A lot of the stuff you talked about with Joseph McCarthy is going to be very closely related to my guy today, particularly when it comes to the manipulation of the masses, but also the kind of the idea of the American way of life being central to their point. I would like to talk to you and introduce you to E. Bruce Harrison, the man behind the lies. I just also want to thank, if anyone listens to this, big thanks to Rigged, who have produced this article that I've cribbed like 95% of this from. So thank you guys. It's a very in-depth article about E. Bruce Harrison, who is probably the most important person you have never heard of in your life, and I'll explain why now. E. Bruce was another behind-the-scenes guru, all shucks and southern charm, but a master manipulator of the public and the government. Harrison's career began as a journalist and was active in the Society of Professional Journalists, formerly known as Sigma Delta Chey,
like chai tea,
like that. Yes,
okay,
delicious. He also co-chaired the group's Project Watchdog, which was aimed at press freedom, which is going to be an interesting pivot coming up, and was also in hosting its First Amendment Center in Washington. So he was very core central journalist freedom, speech and freedom of press and things. So he's, you know, immediately thinking, okay, this guy's not only had a good education, clearly, but he's off to an interesting start in terms of like freedom and stuff, right?
Right. He's getting out there and it seems like doing good things, right?
Yeah. So he also spent time working for a member of Congress and campaigning for the election of John F. Kennedy in 1960. Hey. So again, similar time frame. We're talking here on the opposite side of the floor to Joseph McCarthy, probably very different, diametrically opposed, I would imagine, with his points of view at this point. He was surrounded by forward-thinking Democrats, champions of modern freedom, and random people that wanted to fuck JFK. So
yeah. I mean,
I think that was a pretty big group there.
A lot of people wanted that man. But his favorite visitors to the Alabama senator's office were the corporate lobbyists. His boss had no time for these kinds of people because he thought they're scum, and he was probably right. But Bruce liked the cut of their jib and the idea that business was a better way to solve problems than policy would ever be. So, as a result of various Mad Men-style late-night booze sessions, the chemical lobbyists wooed him to work for them, making him the very first, and I was unaware of this job title until I researched this, Environmental Information Officer ever. That sounds like...
Sounds legit.
Questions about that. Environmental Information Officer. What does that conjure up in your minds? Just going to ask you.
Big Brother. I don't know. I'm trying to think.
Sure.
Information officer seems like that's where you would go and get the information that you're looking for, and you can trust the sources without checking it too much. Right?
What about you, Laurel? What does that make you think?
Yeah, that sounds about the right for me as well too. Just someone that's probably getting the information from whoever is leading environmental science of whatever that meant at the time, and then being like, here's this information. He's like, I am the gatekeeper of this information. Here I am. Ask me.
Yeah, the idea is with that kind of title, you're going to someone who is a PR person, but who is also skilled in disseminating complex information and giving it to people in understandable chunks that they can then use to educate other people and maybe use for whatever means they need it for. That's not what he did. And he almost immediately found himself facing an enormous challenge when he was tasked with beating back the first wave of the environmental movement and that damn book, Silent Spring. So I'm going to talk to you now briefly about what Silent Spring is. It is an environmental science book written by Rachel Carson, published on the 27th of September 1952. The book documented the environmental harm caused by the indiscriminate use of pesticides. Carson accused the chemical industry of spreading disinformation and public officials of accepting the industry's marketing claims unquestioningly. In the late 1950s, Carson began to work on environmental conservation, not conservatism, especially... Sorry, couldn't resist.
Fair. That's absolutely fair.
Especially environmental problems that she believed were caused by synthetic pesticides. The result of her research was Silent Spring, which brought environmental concerns to the American public. It made what was at that point very much a fringe idea and movement. It made it completely mainstream because people were like, oh my God, my children are going to die from this. And they did. So the book was met with fierce opposition by the chemical companies, but it swayed public opinion and led a reversal in U.S. pesticide policy and a nationwide ban on DDT for agricultural use, and an environmental movement that led to the creation of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. So this one book killed DDT and brought about the kind of the chrysalis, the kind of the central idea of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, which is an incredibly important branch of the U.S. government.
There's a really important job.
Yeah, they do. I don't know how well they're doing it these days, but it's neither here nor there.
Here they don't have much money.
No, they keep getting money taken away from them, and you might be about to see why. In 2006, Silent Spring was named one of the 25 greatest science books of all time by the editors of Discover magazine. Now that we got that out of the way, you understand why he was brought in. He lost this battle. Mr. I've forgotten the bastard's name. Mr. Harrison. Mr. E. Bruce Harrison. He lost the battle, but he learned some lessons. So he's learning lessons from history. So I kind of like him for that, but not what he's about to do with it. He then went back to work for a mining company that sent him off to Indonesia to set up a deal to create the world's largest copper mine. When he came back to Washington, D.C. in 1972, it was clear that the industry had truly been caught flat-footed by the environmental movement and was struggling to regain its standing. There it is. sorry, I lost my place. Most modern environmental legislation was passed between 1965 and 1972, and the EPA was established in 1970 to enforce it. All of that happened while Harrison was out of the country and before he really got a hold of all of these lobbyists and people that had power. So in the chemical, established in 1970, Harrison's old pals in the chemical industry and the American Petroleum Institute were losing in this new world. And he was in a perfect position to help them win again. He knew business, he knew government, he knew lobbying and PR, and now he even had foreign relations under his belt. So he was the perfect go-to guy for some cloak and dagger shit that we're about to see, the dark arts of PR. Harrison's big idea was to combine various industries, unions, and government entities together into groups that could be more that could get more done and couldn't be traced to any one company. So he's doing the Shell Corporation thing that people are now still doing to this day in Panama and the fucking random places where
Panama Papers there,
yeah, the Panama Papers. He's basically inventing that, this shady bastard. He created the National Environmental Development Association, or NEDA, a vaguely pro-environmental sounding name that was actually a coalition of chemical, mining, oil and gas and AG companies, along with industry-friendly politicians and unions. Really anyone who had a bone to pick with the new environmental regulations, or who just really like shooting hippies. Just really got to shoot me a beatnik today. I'm gonna join these guys. They look like fun.
I imagine there was some people that were tricked into it by it sounding vaguely environmental protectiveness.
Absolutely, and that was actually the case. However, the illusion didn't last long, because you go into one of these meetings and you're like, oh my god, this is a vampire nest. What the hell am I doing? My neck's open. What am I doing here? Where's my garlic? Harrison made NEDA the first clients of his new PR agency, Harrison and Associates, which he co-founded with his new wife, Patricia. Patricia was very much an equal partner in the firm and very involved in the NEDA account. This word account is, that's kind of gross. Years later, she would work as the co-chair of the Republican National Committee and as a staffer in George W. Bush's State Department. Boo! Personal feelings coming in there. So, and I'll just read you her official state bio reads: as a founding partner of E. Bruce Harrison Company, among the country's top 10 owner-managed public affair firms. Prior to its sale in 1996, she created and directed the programs in the public interest, comprising diverse stakeholder groups, including the National Environmental Development Association, a partnership of labor, agricultural, and industry working for better environmental solutions together. The last part of that bio is utter bullshit, because you can't just write planet killer.
Yeah, I bet that wouldn't be a good sell.
No. So, thoughts so far on E. Bruce Harrison? It's you're starting. So he's lost right at this point, but he's starting to get shit together, right? Yeah. Go on, Derek.
I'm playing with graphics over here to try and do some stuff, and then I forgot to bring it up.
There we go. So this is actually a very good visual representation of what Harrison's the father of. Disinformation is his weapon, and he wields it like a fucking sword, like King Arthur and the Lady in the Lake sword. I can't remember the name of the fucking thing now.
Excalibur.
Thank you, Laurel.
I don't know why I held it in my hands like this. I was like, oh, it's Excalibur. That's
Excalibur. Little dagger.
I was over here thinking of the Lady in the Lake, and I was all M. Night Shyamalan.
There you go.
Oh, yeah.
God, that film. Holy shit.
Movie.
Yeah, my God. M. Night Shyamalan is Jesus. That's what I learned from that film. They would. So the groups would monitor all proposed environmental policies, brief NEDA members, and craft messaging around it and make sure that the press had the industry viewpoint on things. They also lobbied members of Congress. There you go. Another perfect, wonderful illustration.
I think that's the Lincoln Monument, though.
Yeah, it is, but that'll do. If you
it's a government thing,
it's very American.
It's a government thing. If you start to see his head move, be concerned. There's something inside. So they also lobbied members of Congress and even testified before committees about the economic harm of new environmental regulation and what it would do. Most importantly, NEDA helped to push the idea of balance and necessary trade-offs between protecting health and the environment on one hand and economic growth on the other. They originated the idea of, yeah, that's fine, got to save the planet, but a bit of money and a bit of money. Give us a bit of money.
Yeah.
Americans who had been getting into the whole clean air, clean water thing were suddenly rationing gas. Oh, I've skipped a whole chunk here. I'm sorry. At the same time, the global oil crisis had Americans looking for new forms of domestic energy, which not only spurred research into solar power, but also into drilling in previously protected areas. So while they were getting into the whole clean air, clean water thing, there was suddenly rationing of gas and people getting very worried about losing the American way of life. Now, there's that word again that we had before. I have to ask you, this is obviously in the 70s at this point. I'm not American. I've been numerous times, but I don't really know. The American dream is very much a nebulous idea, but the American way of life, I feel, is something that can be more clearly defined. What exactly do you guys believe is the American way of life?
I wish I knew.
I mean, is that the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which could still be very nebulous as well. I feel like that kind of gets, I could be totally wrong. This is just my knee-jerk reaction to this. It kind of gets held up as like, this is America. Like, this is what we are. We are, Constitution and freedom and eagles and give me your tie, give me your core. Yeah, this is our, this is where you could start a new life, where you can have opportunities and you can have, freedoms, that might be civil liberties. The
ironic thing is what you're describing there is kind of what I kind of had in mind. And one of the things, whenever you bring up like Americana, American imagery and stuff, one of the first things I think of, ironically, when we're on this conversation, is the American like wilderness and countryside and environment. I think of like all your amazing rolling plains and mountains and forests and countryside and rivers and all of that shit. The fact that you're now fighting off wolves while you record this podcast, Laurel. Like
in my cabin bunker, I'm like, oh, the werewolves are out. I gotta
living the American way of life.
Monster coming up from the lake. It's the wilderness out here, folks.
Yeah, America. And like, it's so weird that like that image of America, and certainly in the reels that I see on the news, it's so closely tied to Americana and what I imagine the American way of life is. And yet we're talking about a guy who basically is doing everything he can to destroy the environment, and like people are now drilling on land that they shouldn't be and shit like that.
So what if that's a national park?
Yeah, so what if we've got to move these people to some other part of the country? That's fine, as long as we can drill for oil and shit. So I'm glad we've got that cleared up, because my idea of the American way of life was very ill-defined, but it seems that it really depends on who you are as to what your interpretation of what that means, I think.
I want to be a galactic emperor of mankind.
Yeah, me too.
No, that sounds like too much responsibility.
It's also, you probably have to do a bit of work, right? I want to work a 30-hour week. I don't want to have to work overtime, I want to sit down and watch my Netflix stuff. So
I feel attacked.
Yeah, there you go. So I don't want to be an emperor. Too much work. That's the only problem. But so meanwhile, research scientists at oil companies and universities were stacking up evidence about a new, far deadlier sort of environmental impact for the industry to worry about: the greenhouse effect. Thanks to our old friend Thomas Midgley Jr.
Yep,
the planet killer. Thank you, you reckless, irresponsible bastard.
I'll just put some lead in it.
Yeah, just lead and everything. And then let me set up this contraption to help me get out of bed / choke me while I masturbate. That won't come back to bite me in the arse. Sorry, that's my theory on how he died. It wasn't because the contraption was helping him get out of bed. He invented autoerotic asphyxiation. Yeah, so that's my theory. In the 1980s, the oil crisis became a glut, and oil companies were facing the dual threat of cratering prices and looming environmental regulations. But Harrison and his compatriots, that's an interesting word to use, had done a fantastic job by this point of convincing Americans that regulation was bad for the economy. No regulation. No, don't want that. No, we can't make money that way. And that the American way of life needed to be protected at all costs, even though no one really knows what that actually means, apparently, especially with those commie bastards gaining power in Russia and China, and possibly having one or two people in the State Department who were actually probably just gay. Maybe that's probably what that was. In 1989, as the world was growing increasingly concerned about global warming and regulations seemed more and more likely, Harrison brought automakers, manufacturers, utilities, oil, gas, and coal mining companies together to figure out a strategy. He called it the Global Climate Coalition, which sounds like something the Justice League would fight. Sorry. And the first thing he did was get its members into the international climate meetings of scientists and politicians that were just starting. GCC members and Harrison himself were involved in shaping the UN framework on climate change. This man had a hand in the UN's shaping of global economic and environmental policy. That's scary.
And he was the type of person that believed that balance between making money and saving the planet was where we really needed to be focusing. Right?
Yeah. Yes. And this, again, of course, this is the person you want leading the world's response to environmental change. A guy who was a journalist and who works for a PR agency. That's who you want leading the charge.
Marketing.
Yes.
Marketing totally knows about climate change.
Don Draper sounds like a smart guy. Let's give it to him. He'll know what to do. They were weighing in on every report from the global climate scientists, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, particularly the report in 1992. They were at the first international climate conference, the Rio Earth Summit, pushing world leaders to embrace the idea that there was plenty of time to act on climate change, and that we shouldn't risk economic hardship, i.e. billionaires need gold things to do it. And that, in fact, business could be trusted to do this voluntarily without any kind of like gentle hand on the tiller from mummy and daddy. Like, get your shit together, kid. No, my room gets to stay untidy for a few more decades. It's fine. Nothing bad's going to happen.
I feel like his playbook is still in use.
Basically, yes. The playbook was very clearly defined from the outset. The group, who were very, very fond of spreading this money around, spent about $1 million a year from 1989 to 1997 in the lead up to the monumental Kyoto summit, which actually was a big win for environmentalists, but could have been even bigger had this arsehole not been around. On advertising, they spent that money, $1 million a year, so that people were like, I don't know, quite like oil. And $13 million a year in 1997 alone, as the climate summit drew near. That's $25 million in today's money on advertising in 1997. I feel like they
could have been spent to maybe do something else.
Yeah, fuck me, man. You could make a new national park for that kind of money.
If you have to spend that much advertising on your ideas, I feel like maybe they might not be the greatest of ideas.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, man, we're throwing so much money at this. Have we tried just doing the opposite? That might be cheaper. Dude. We're supposed to be all about the money. Why are we blowing so much money on this shit, right? The group also spent $63 million in campaign contributions during the 1990s, the equivalent of $120 million today. That's just on campaign contributions, mostly to Republican candidates.
I still don't understand that. I spend millions of dollars to get a job that pays $100,000 a year. That doesn't seem sketchy at all.
No, not at all. I have a big problem with campaign contributions. We talked about this last week with Paul Flowers, who randomly donated £50,000 to Ed Balls, love that guy's name, so that he could have a nice new office. There was also a thing recently with Boris Johnson, another nail in his seemingly enormous coffin that could just take every nail possible, where someone donated £100,000 to build him a treehouse at Chequers so that his kid could play in the treehouse. And like the police said, no, you can't build a treehouse because someone will try and shoot at you while you're in the treehouse. Can we not do that, please? And the guy was like, no, I didn't get any special favors. I just gave him £100,000 for a treehouse. That's all. Nothing dodgy in that.
It's a hell of a treehouse, man.
That's the tree mansion. You know, like you're dehousing hundreds of squirrels just so that you can play in a tree. Like that's too much. So anyway, by this point, Harrison had sold his firm to PR giant Ruder Finn because his wife was elected to the co-chair of the Republican National Committee and helped steer George W. Bush to victory. Boo. Harrison stayed on, though, with Ruder Finn to advise on various clients, including his creation of the GCC. Bush won his election, of course, and within weeks, Mrs. Harrison had got in his ear, and he had pulled the United States out of the Kyoto Agreement, using Harrison's favorite argument that acting on climate change was unnecessarily harmful to the U.S. economy. The idiot son of an arsehole.
Man, I don't know. This kind of bums me out that his job and his idea was in a way knowingly coming up with ways to just put off the right thing for just a little bit longer so I can make a little more money. Or some people I know can make a little more money.
Exactly. And I can get paid handsomely for working for them. It's like he's not even doing it for himself. He's doing it for like a portion of the paycheck. You know, it's like, how fucking desperate are you, mate? But also, like, he knows the science. This man has seen the science. He knows what's coming. He doesn't want the public to know. He doesn't want anyone else to know. He wants to sow the seeds of doubt, and we'll get to that in a second. Patricia Harrison was renewed for her election help with a plum assignment in the very same Bush State Department. Bruce went on to create the whole sustainable business ecosystem, earning him the nickname the Godfather of Greenwashing, which he hated because it's true, and he doesn't like the truth. He eventually became a professor at Georgetown, and Patricia was hired as the president of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the public-private partnership that oversees government funding of public media in the United States. Some critics voiced concern at the time that her time as RNC co-chair would make her too biased for the position. They're right. Nobody listened. No one knew. Don't. Yeah, exactly. This is Patricia's lasting legacy now. No one knew that she had also helped create the myth of clean coal, or that she and her husband were, as one sociologist puts it, the intellectual parents of climate denial. Patricia Harrison remains in that position today. E. Bruce Harrison died in January 2021. He was eulogized by national papers as a pioneer in environmental communications. However, and this is the part that made my jaw hit the floor, his greatest achievement was covered by the BBC recently. Remember the GCC that I've mentioned multiple times? Well, on an early autumn day in 1992, E. Bruce Harrison stood in a room full of business leaders and delivered a pitch like no other. At stake was a contract worth around about $500,000 a year, about £850,000, because the BBC thinks people don't know. They can't do exchange rates in this country, apparently.
I can't do exchange rates between... Yeah, never mind.
It's not that hard.
I can't figure out time zones.
It's fine. It worked out. 850,000 in today's money, so not a big amount of money, but like enough for a pitch. The prospective client, the GCC, who he was heavily involved with, which represented the oil, coal, auto workers, utility, steel, and rail industries, was looking for a communication partner to change the narrative of climate change.
Change the narrative of climate change. So instead of facts and figures and stuff,
truth.
Yeah.
They wanted to change the narrative. His first suggestion was to change the name from global warming to climate change, because warming makes people scared. Climate change, nah, it changes all the time. It could be raining in 5 minutes. That's climate change.
Mhm.
So Don Ream and Terry Yossi, two of Harrison's team present on the day, are sharing their stories for the first time. This only came out last week. Everybody wanted to get the Global Climate Coalition account. This sounds like an episode of Mad Men, says Ream. And there I was, smack in the middle of it. Yeah, boozing it up with Don Draper. Terry Yossi, who had recently been recruited from the American Petroleum Institute, became a senior advisor at the firm, remembers that Harrison began the pitch by reminding his audience that he was instrumental in fighting the auto reforms, and he had done so in part by reframing the issue. The same tactic would now help beat climate regulation that would persuade people that the scientific facts weren't settled, and that alongside the environment, policymakers needed to consider how action on climate change would, in the GCC's view, negatively affect American jobs. They took our jobs, trade, and prices. The strategy would be implemented through an extensive media campaign, everything from placing quotes and pitching opinion pieces, so-called op-eds, to direct contacts with journalists, because he still had shitloads of them from his time working for JFK and that campaign. A lot of reporters were assigned to write stories, Ream says, and they were struggling with the complexity of the issue. So I would write backgrounders so reporters could read them and get up to speed. He wrote the articles for them. Uncertainty ran through the full gamut of the GCC's publications, a creative array of letters, glossy brochures, and monthly newsletters. Ream and the team, that's so funny, were prolific within a year. Harrison's firm claimed to have secured more than 500 specific mentions in the media. In August 1993, Harrison took stock of progress in another meeting with the GCC. The rising awareness of the scientific uncertainty has caused some in Congress to pause on advocating new initiatives, declared an updated internal strategy pitch shared with the BBC by Terry Yossi last week. Activists sounding the alarm over global warming have publicly conceded that they have lost ground in the communications arena over the last year. Now, Harrison counseled they needed to expand their external voices, making their case. Scientists, economists, academics, and other noted experts carry great credibility with the media and general public than industry representatives. While most climate scientists agreed that human-caused climate change was a real issue that would require action, a small group argued that there was no cause for alarm, and plenty of time. The plan was to pay these skeptics to give speeches or write op-eds, about $1,500 per article, and to arrange media tours so they could appear on local TV and radio stations. My role was to identify the voices that were in the mainstream and to give those voices a stage, Ream says to the BBC. There was a lot that we didn't know at the time, and part of my role was to highlight that we didn't know. You do know. You've read the information and you've written the stories for people.
Yeah. Oh, man.
There's more.
Okay.
He says the media, there's more. He says the media was hungry for these perspectives. Journalists were actually actively looking for the contrarians. It was really feeding an appetite that was already there. Journalists don't like the truth if it's only coming from one source. And I understand that, because a lot of journalists want double confirmation on everything until they go to press. But sometimes you trust the tens of thousands of scientists that are saying the same thing. Oh my God, the wolf's angry.
It's made it inside.
It's inside. Barricade yourself, Laurel.
I feel like you can't trust scientists that are doing it because they're getting notoriety and pay. Like, you should be doing it for the science and the data, and like, and I feel like he might be one of the people that created let's look at scientists used to think the earth was flat and they really didn't believe what's his face. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, actually, scientists, even back in the Renaissance period, really didn't think the earth was flat. The majority of people had climbed up a mountain and seen the curvature of the earth. They're like, oh, okay, it's not flat. Oh shit, my own eyes. That works. I've done it. I've climbed to the top of Snowdon. I've seen Ireland. I'm like, holy shit, there's a bit of a curve there. That's amazing. Wow, we live on an orb. Okay. Many of these skeptics and deniers have rejected the idea that the funding from the GCC and other industrial groups had an impact on their views. That's because they're it wasn't me. Yuppie Nuremberg excuse. But the scientists and environmentalists tasked with repudiating them argue the reality of climate change, encountering a well-organized and effective campaign that they found hard to match. Basically, there's a lot of bullshit. The Global Climate Coalition is seeding doubt everywhere, fogging the air, and environmentalists really don't know what's hitting them. Environmental campaigner Joe Passacantrando remembers. What the geniuses of the PR firms, and this is the thing that really hit me. This is from the guy who worked with E. Bruce Harrison. What the geniuses of the PR firms who work for these big fossil fuel companies know is that the truth has nothing to do with who wins the argument. If you say something enough times, people will begin to believe it. Echoing a quote from the head of propaganda for the Nazi regime, Joseph Goebbels, who said, if you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. E. Bruce Harrison, ladies and gentlemen, the man who created climate denial and lied constantly.
Ooh.
And there's this picture.
Look
for
at
people watching online.
There's an estimate here that he pushed back the kind of environmental reforms that we're now kind of desperately looking for by 25 years. So, and God knows how many people have died, lost their homes, been injured, had their lives ruined as a result of climate change. I
feel like what happens
is all for $500,000.
Yeah. But what, a year, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No. $500,000 a year. But like, really? You know?
But still, I mean, there's no
Go horses, mate.
What?
Go bet on the horses. Like, you'll win $500,000 eventually. Christ, sorry, that was just a random thing. Sorry, Derek, carry on.
I don't know. I feel like if we would listen, I don't know. The truth seems like it should be easier to sell, and maybe that's why it doesn't have as much money behind it.
Yeah. You have a PR guy who's very good with information, and unfortunately he's on the wrong side. And
unfortunate.
You basically take a message, and if you don't frame it in such a way that everyone can understand it, then very much people very quickly turn off, and then the people that do trumpet that message seem like they're preaching, and then it gets turned off even more. I want your guys' opinion on E. Bruce Harrison here, not George. I think George would have probably punched him or something. What do you think of the mastermind behind global climate denial?
Ooh, well, I'm glad to know about him. I mean, I have not heard about him before, and so hearing the story, it's like, oh, all right. You know, he strikes me as one of those. Is it Thomas Midgley Jr.?
Yes.
Was that his name? Yeah. I see a lot of parallels here of just like, you know, like that sort of.
Yeah.
It's not.
I know, but
me now. Or yes, I know, but or it's not affecting me now, or you know, I can make this little extra bit of money, which again, for what, you know? But oh, yeah.
It's so depressing when you find, because we all knew, right? We all knew that this climate denial and flat Earth shit and like all of this stuff, like we all knew it was false. We all knew the scientists were right. We've seen it with our own eyes. We've experienced it firsthand. There's always, but even though it's because it's such an effective message, there's always that part of you like, oh, maybe. But now we know. This article came out from the BBC like 5 days ago. And it was all because he wanted a contract worth $500,000 a year that he was like, well, we're not going to call it global warming. We're going to call it climate change. And we're also going to basically pay people to lie. Yeah.
And it changed. The climate did change.
Yeah.
And it's, oh man, it's super messed up that it's basically his $500,000 a year came from all of the industries of the Koch brothers and a whole bunch of the things that, you know how when I said I don't want to be the emperor because I would rather do nothing, and I think that's how we got here, is because it's cheaper for businesses to do nothing and ignore the problem than to do the right thing, spend a little bit of money on research and development and different ways to be better. We stopped innovating.
We did.
Because of
and
this.
I also feel like a part of this is like down to human nature as well, because as humans, you know, it's like, well, I can do that later. You know, it's fine. I'll do that, you know. And some people, I mean, I know some people who are very studious and very prompt with their actions, but I'm one of those people as well who falls into the trap of, I'll do it later. You leave it till the last minute and stuff. And like, unfortunately, that approach seems to have gone all the way to the top of our thinking about the world. And now we're facing the consequences, or at least the beginning of them. And a lot of that is down to this guy who, again, like Joseph McCarthy, understood human nature and human beliefs. Like they said, the will to be a contrarian and the will to disagree with this was there. They just needed a little push. So it's so interesting that you have two people in E. Bruce Harrison and Joseph McCarthy, whose main skill, and pretty much only skill really, is their ability to read and manipulate people. And as a result, they have between them sowed mass political uncertainty and ruining of lives and potential destruction of the planet. Just two people.
Yeah, if you can get people to doubt what's real, you can really get
rule the world. Yeah. So I would like a score for E. Bruce Harrison. Also, what the hell do you think E stands for? I could never find this out. I want to go Enos or something like that.
I think it was Emmett.
Was it Emmett? Oh, he doesn't deserve Emmett.
Let me see.
He can't be Emmett. Call him
Enos?
something else.
Did you say Enos?
Enos. Yeah, I quite like Enos.
Yeah.
Well,
Yep, I think that's his name, Emmett Bruce Harrison Jr. Yes.
Oh, fuck that guy. Yeah, he took a cool name.
Yeah, not him.
Yeah. I found this here.
Oh, what have you found?
I found this here. Maybe. Jeez.
Is it not loading now?
Oh, I got it. Here we go. Whoop. There it is.
Oh, there we go. Yeah,
that's
man, the evil ones live long, don't they?
He looks a lot like Mr. Burns from The Simpsons.
Fuck yes.
He does, yes.
So much. And has the same motivation.
Yeah.
Since the dawn of time, man has longed to destroy the sun.
Good episode.
Yeah, it was a great episode. So, score for E. Bruce Harrison. What do you guys think?
Ladies first.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. What did our buddy? Well, or not buddy. What did Midgley get? Do you guys know offhand? It would be like a 93 or something like that,
so
or
we kind of retroactively raised his level because we had he was quite early on in the show, and then we had people like fucking New Jack and and what's his name? A bunch of cult leaders and stuff
David
like
Koresh
that. David Koresh and Rick James and all these people who got really high scores because they were a bit mad. But then I looked back at it and I was like, Thomas Midgley Jr. killed millions of people, really. So I think I retrospectively raised it to either a 97 or a 98. I can't remember exactly. Just really get a scoreboard for this.
And to be fair, I just make up my scores like it's the Whose Line Is It Anyway score points.
Yeah, that's great.
That's good to know, because whenever you guys do your ratings at the end of each story, I always sit and go, "Oh, I don't know, maybe an 87 or 6," because I just again kind of make up a number and go, "That sounds good."
Yeah, sounds about right.
It's good to know that you guys
off the cuff.
Because in my head, in my mind, I've been thinking, 1 to 2 points less than probably 2 points since you guys moved him up than Thomas Midgley.
Wow. Yeah.
I'm thinking
95.
Yeah. He's up here. I was like, I'm going to put him down a few pegs.
Sure.
So I don't know, maybe like a 94, 5.
Yeah.
Is that reasonable?
Yeah, that sounds good. Derek, what do you think?
I was going to go with a 94 because at this point, he may be responsible for the fact that my kids' grandchildren won't be able to sustain life as we know it here because of denying what's happening. And we're so close to going over the edge when we could have just done little things. But this guy put the money and the words into saying, nah, let's just hang tight.
Yeah,
and
we'll
so,
be
I'll
all
give him a
right.
94.
Yeah. It's very much the Shaun of the Dead thing. We'll just go to the Winchester and everything will blow over. But yeah, I feel like I kind of, first of all, I will take that because it's a very high score. But also, I agree with the idea that he's not quite as high as Thomas Midgley, because Thomas Midgley was a scientist. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he physically, like, he enacted it. Like, this guy is a PR guy, so he's like, I'll smudge the books for you a little bit. I'll like put the message out there and make it all messy. We all know what's going on, but don't worry, I'll handle it. Give me $500,000. Whereas Thomas Midgley was like, I am going to be an industrialist and make a shitload of money, and people can die. Fuck it.
Poison everything.
So it's like, it's not quite as bad, but still pretty fucking bad.
I feel like Midgley might have been one of the dudes that was like, hey, E, I need you to do something for me.
Yeah. Hey, can we have a conversation between you and me? We can just destroy the solar system. Holy shit. We can pollute dozens of planets. 95 for Enos Bruce Harrison. And he's going, I'm going with Enos. Fuck him. He can't have him. Enos Bruce Harrison. And Joseph McCarthy, the father of crazy ranting politicians everywhere. It was a hell of an episode. I mean, I knew last week, like, we were going to be covering, I mean, I didn't initially, but when we got on to David Koresh, I was like, ooh, big name, like famous, particularly for our generation. Everyone remembers that crazy guy who was in the fire. But like McCarthy, huge name, and then a guy who is possibly going to become well known for destroying the planet. There's some pretty heavy hitters right there. This might be the highest scoring episode we've ever had.
Oh, I think so.
Yeah, I think so too. Thank you so much, Laurel. Honestly, you've added so much to this conversation, because like the perspective you've added on McCarthy. So I didn't get a chance to learn about him in school, and a lot of stuff that you mentioned I didn't know about. But yeah, it was really fascinating. How did you find? Can Rockefeller say there are chemicals in the water that are turning the frogs gay? There are chemicals in the water that are turning the frogs gay. Sorry.
Very nice.
But thank you. Yeah, so how did you find researching McCarthy? Because obviously we talk about, we enjoy researching and stuff. How did you find that?
It was a little bit, because I covered the Lavender Scare separately.
Sure.
I was like, oh, this should be a pretty easy to put together sort of thing, because I kind of know enough about the guy who is the central character in both those stories. But when I focused more on him, sorry, my soup pot's letting my sliding my computer into my lap. When I went into actually researching him, it was a little bit more rabbit hole-y than I kind of realized it would be. There's again a lot of nuance, a lot of the cogs in the machine, because you would go through the story and you're like, ooh, well, this little thing over here influenced that a little bit, and that made him think this, and that made his crony do that. Things like that, where I was like, oh, I've got to pull back a little bit on this. But as much as, I don't know, maybe this is just me, as much as I like wanted to throttle him, it's sad, It's sad for mostly for all the people that were affected, first and foremost. But it's just like, you little sad man. And sometimes, where I was just like, you feel that to be self-important, or to, to kind of, to feel important, and to kind of, I don't know, prove yourself and your place in the world, you need to belittle others. You need to be a bully. You need to ruin lives, and sad for you. And, and obviously I'm guessing, again, this is just my opinion, but with his alcoholism, that, that's a whole nother layer to add into it as well, of somebody trying to I don't know, self-medicate or, whatever it
Cope
might
with the
be.
situation, sure.
But it's like, okay, there are plenty, and you guys talk about it as well too. There are plenty of people who have, hurt and mental illness and whatever it might be, but they don't go on to hurt others. And, so that's where that.
Yeah. So there is an element of, there is an element of sadness to Joseph McCarthy's story, as grotesque as some of his actions were. That, like you say, if somebody is struggling with addiction or mental health issues or whatever it might be, self-medicating can seem easy. And if the wrong people are around the wrong substances, it can give them a real rush, a sense of power. And, it can lead them to act in ways that, if they're in the wrong profession, can actually get them quite a lot of influence and success.
Right.
Yeah, like if they're a person that's self-medicating with alcohol and they have to be a lawyer that has access to powerful politicians, they might wreak some havoc.
Exactly. Yeah. It's really scary.
Yeah.
And obviously the age he was in, the environment he was in, that would have been a huge thing. Like, oh, you can go out drinking with the boys. Nobody's going to throw up any barriers about that. You can get blasted. Go out, buddy. It's part of the culture. But he took that and it became his driving. He died of liver. Was it liver issues?
Cirrhosis.
Yeah, cirrhosis, and then they'll say like liver failure. It seemed like there's a few things that kind of happened at once for him, but it's all liver disease issue.
It's really sad. I had a lot of fun. It was, again, a lot of this guy came about because I read the BBC article about E. Bruce Harrison, and it was just that moment where I was like, oh, here it is. It's like finding the missing link, even though there is no missing link. So like it's just like finding that, like, finally we get it. I understand. This is the chrysalis, the start of the climate denial, and the fact that I know people who like, oh, I don't know if it's man-made, maybe it's volcanoes. Like there's people out there I know that do not necessarily believe in climate change, and I just bite my tongue. And a lot of that is thanks to this guy. In fact, almost all of it is down to this guy. So I had a lot of fun researching this. And when I found out you were going to be on, Laurel, I couldn't wait to tell you this stuff because like we're all history junkies and we kind of love like learning new stuff. And I love imparting that and helping people discover. So thank you so much for being on and talking us through. Can you, once again, can you remind us where your podcast can be found and your social media can be found?
Yeah, so we're at Hightailing Through History, and that's on Apple Podcasts, Samsung Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, all those places. So you just type in Hightailing Through History, and you'll find us in there. And in terms of social media, Instagram's our main place. We're at Hightailing History. But also, we're on TikTok recently, and that's fun.
And you're on Twitter as well. That's right.
I recently got on there. I'm like, oh, this is what this is all about.
Yeah.
But it's great. But Instagram's kind of our main place. But TikTok, Hightailing History, and Facebook and Twitter at Hightailing History. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And if you guys want to follow us, History's Greatest Idiots, we are on Twitter and Instagram. You can follow us at Greatest Idiots on Twitter. And at History's Greatest Idiots on Instagram. We also have a Patreon page if you would like to become our first ever Patreon. Go to patreon.com/History's Greatest Idiots and you can get a bunch of swag. I guess that's a word I should not use.
We're not using that word?
I'm 41. So, please go there, support us, support the podcast. Laurel, thank you so much for being on.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
It was again, and we look forward to bringing you on again in the future. We'll give you a bit of a break, let you come up with another wonderful idiot. And then
I've got some, I've got some in my back pocket for you guys. To be honest,
we like a backlog of idiots. We like lining them up. Like, oh, you're next. Oh, I can't wait. And Derek, thank you so much. Like the graphics we've had and the input and stuff has been really, really good. I know it's been a different role for you. Thank you so much for doing that.
I just wait until I figure out how to do it.
You did great. You're always down on yourself, man.
Oh, well, I don't know what I'm doing, so I was just kind of guessing. But once
You're
I know
doing
what
a very
I'm
good
doing,
job. So you don't know what you're doing.
None
of us know what we're doing. We're adults cosplaying as grown-ups. So yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for listening to us and watching us live. And we will see you again in a couple of weeks' time. So until then, take care now. Bye.